As electric vehicles and clean energy technologies go mainstream, so does the misinformation about them. We launched our Stop Burning Stuff initiative in Westminster recently, hours before the news broke that our current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was moving the goalposts on the UK's net zero commitments. This only reinforced the critical importance of getting the truth about these technologies out there. We busted some of the most persistent myths in front of a live audience.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the official launch of #StopBurningStuff.
A campaign... a campaign to get to the truth about electric vehicles and clean energy.
My name is Robert Llewellyn, formerly of various TV shows, I won't mention them, you don't need to, and the founder of the Fully Charged Show, which has just passed 1 million subscribers. Thank you.
And I'm Quentin Wilson, also formerly, we're both formalies, Robert, of a certain motoring show, which we won't mention, and the founder of Fair Charge. Delighted to be working with Robert, a campaign to harness the advantages and opportunities of EVs and electrification.
So, yes, in recent months... Oh, thank you, Quentin. Thank you. In recent months, we really have seen an incredible ramp-up in misinformation, in weird stories about car parks. We're going to be talking about this later on, about bridges collapsing, about explosions and fires, all that sort of thing. And we've seen it really ramp up significantly, especially in newspapers and online.
And this is destabilizing, and that is not too strong a word, destabilizing the energy transition and the sales of electric vehicles. So we are here to try and push back against that, because it is so important that we get heard amidst all that white noise, which is, broadly speaking, nonsense.
Yeah. And I think that's what Stop Burning Stuff is, the really important aspect of it. It is a completely independent campaign which is funded by individuals, not by big companies, not by big corporations. It is people, general people who often have electric cars go, hang on, I'm driving one of these cars that's going to explode, crush a bridge, collapse a car park, not work, have to throw away the battery after 10 minutes, all those things. And they go, no, they're all right, they're fine. And that's really, what I think, an important aspect of what we're doing here today.
So before we separate the truth from the lies, would you please give a very warm welcome to Fully Charged Show's CEO, Dan Caesar. Woo!
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Quentin. Thank you for giving a round of applause to every single line. I suggest you don't do that for my bit, because it might slow us down significantly. We're going to get back to the educational, entertaining bit in a moment, but I'm here to set the scene, so I get to do the boring bit, I'm afraid. But hopefully it won't be too boring. So, Fully Charged Show has been in operation for 13 years. As Robert mentioned, we have more than 1 million subscribers, and around 100,000 visitors have come to our global live shows in 2023 alone. So I think it's fair to say that we know the topic, the technologies, and perhaps most importantly, those that are buying those technologies, as well as anyone in the world. So here's a very quick introduction to the Fully Charged Show.
What a time to be alive. This is it. While the distractions grow louder, the biggest story of our lives is appearing all around us, a revolution in real time. The extraordinary switch from combustion to cleaner, greener, superior technologies. Over the coming few years, our toxic relationship with fossil fuel is coming to a close. It's now time to stop burning stuff. The Fully Charged Show has immersed itself in clean energy and electric vehicles of all shapes and sizes since 2010. From wind to solar to batteries, from Tesla to Rivian to Ford to GM to the Asian invasion of electric vehicles, the Fully Charged Show covers it all. With its network of trusted correspondents in world-leading territories like North America, the UK, Europe and Asia, the Fully Charged Show is the independent, positive voice of its time. Having amassed a sizable YouTube following around the world, And with polished production on a pirate radio budget, it's time for clean energy and electric transportation to go mainstream.
Now, it will come as no surprise that misinformation and disinformation are powerful tools. Fear, uncertainty and doubt can be particularly effective weapons if you would like to maintain the status quo. Doubt is easy to manufacture, fast to spread, and almost impossible to gather back in. This is the last bit of video I'm going to show you this morning, but this scene from the film Doubt perfectly illustrates the danger of misinformation.
The next day she went to confession. She got the old parish priest, Father O'Rourke. She told him the whole thing. Is gossiping a sin? She asked the old man. Was that the hand of God Almighty pointing a finger at me? Should I be asking your absolution, Father? Tell me, have I done something wrong? Yes, Father O'Rourke answered her. Yes, you ignorant, badly brought up female. You've borne false witness against your neighbor. You've played fast and loose with his reputation, and you should be heartily ashamed. So, the woman said she was sorry and asked for forgiveness. Not so fast, says O'Rourke. I want you to go home, take a pillar up on your roof, cut it open with a knife, and return here to me. So the woman went home, took a pillow off her bed, a knife from the drawer, went up the fire escape to her roof, and stabbed the pillow. Then she went back to the old parish priest as instructed. Did you gut the pillow with a knife? He says. Yes, Father. And what was the result? Feathers, she said. Feathers, he repeated. Feathers everywhere, Father. Now, I want you to go back and gather up every last feather that flew out on the wind. Well, she said, it can't be done. I don't know where they went. The wind took them all over. And that, said Father O'Rourke, is gossip.
I'm sure you've all experienced that firsthand. Rumours, innuendo, misinformation that you may face. Our team were coming here in a taxi this morning, and I think they tried to talk the taxi driver into going electric, and they pretty much got hit with every single bit of misinformation about electric vehicles that is out there. I found out how powerful that doubt was when the opinion piece by Rowan Atkinson was published in The Guardian in June. While the pushback to the piece from those better acquainted with the facts was immediate and mildly reassuring, it was quoted back to me by a policeman in Amsterdam who said, I agree with Rowan Atkinson, and we started to have a lively debate in the street. It became clear to me that a lie will go all around the world while truth is still pulling its boots on. Robert, Quentin and I had already been discussing the launch of Stop Burning Stuff, and this strengthened our resolve. At the same time, the success of clickbait seemingly strengthened the resolve of those desperate for clicks online, particularly during this year's advertising downturn. The 12 stories here, which you won't be able to see from that distance, but they're just from 3 sources in the last week alone, and this is not an exhaustive list. While many of these stories are as preposterous as they are disprovable, in some quarters they are successfully dividing opinion. Even though pure EV sales continue to rise in the UK, reaching 20.1% of new car sales in August, we are falling behind our neighbours. More worryingly, this topic, along with net zero, ultra-low emission zones, heat pumps, onshore wind, you name it, is becoming a political football. With party conference season almost upon us, we want to take this opportunity to bring all stakeholders up to speed. To do that, it became increasingly clear to us that we need to bring the experts and EV drivers' voices to the fore. So we announced our intention to give voice to EV drivers 2 months ago, and Stop Burning Stuff already has approximately 1,000 patrons. That's 1,000 individuals that believe in the importance of this cause, enough to contribute between £5 to £50 per month on our Patreon page, and we would like to pay our thanks to them. Some of you are here today. And to say that if you'd like to do the same, you can follow suit via the URL above. But above and beyond financial contributions, there are many ways in which you can get involved. Please come and talk to us after the event for more information. After all, while we're only accepting contributions from individuals, institutions can still work with us beneath the Stop Burning Stuff banner. For now, though, we are delighted to welcome you to our official launch and to very briefly explain our strategy. As of October, we'll welcome our new head of Stop Burning Stuff, Claire Cullen, who's here today. And as well as continuing to grow our Patreon contributions, she will coordinate our efforts to build the best myth-busting site that we can, to rebut stories most likely to go viral, become the go-to spokespeople on these subjects, and attempt to influence political stakeholders too. It's our view, if we can educate and entertain people, we can actually prevent some of these stories from surfacing in the first place. But further than that, we can make people understand that they really need to think very carefully about what they're reading in the media. We are very fortunate to have a number of expert spokespeople confirmed, with many more to follow. You've heard from Quentin, we'll hear more from him today. Ewan McTurk is going to join that. We haven't asked Lorna officially, but I think we will do straight after this. Lorna has huge experience of this, as you'll hear shortly. Ewan is an electrochemist. Hannah Ritchie, who is a data scientist from Our World in Data, is going to join our team, as is Helen Chersky from University College London. You may occasionally hear from me and from Robert, but there actually will be, I think, a growing number of expert voices who will be able to speak to the media on this subject. Above and beyond our initial event, there will be more get-togethers in 2024, including our largest ever exhibition, Everything Electric London, at the ExCeL next March. This is likely to include the biggest battery electric vehicle test drive program in the world, and you will all be invited. Now, one of the things we love to do at our live events is our on-stage discussions, and we love nothing more than a little audience participation. So I'm going to ask 4 short questions in a minute, and if your answer is yes, you should stand up or put your hand up. As you can tell from the puzzled looks, this is not rehearsed at all. So first of all, and you might want to have a good look around at who's standing up at any given point as well. Could you please, and it includes the panellists, could you please stand up if you drive a battery electric vehicle?
Wow.
Okay, have a good look around. Have a good look around. This also helps get the air in people's lungs as well. Could you just sit down a moment? Thank you very much. Second question. Stand up if you drive a battery electric vehicle and have no intention of going back to a combustion engine vehicle. Okay, so that puts to bed they must be quite good, right? That's my assumption from that. We often see with all surveys that it's well above 90% of people won't go back. Fully charged show surveys is actually closer to 100%, but our audience are extremely positive on the subject, so we take that with a pinch of salt. But people rarely go back. Stand up if you believe that mass media representation of battery electric vehicles bears little resemblance to your lived experience of them. Okay, thank you. Sit down again. This is going well so far. I won't push my luck much further, apart from one more question. Stand up if you believe that the mass media representation of battery electric vehicles only harms the UK's economic prospects.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. You've been a great crowd. That wasn't rehearsed at all. It's great to see that. We hoped that would be the case. We didn't know. That's enough for me. Now it's back to the main event. I'm going to have the microphone here, so when you need me, Robert, to run into the crowd, etc., I'll be available to you. But it's my pleasure to hand you over to your host, Robert Llewellyn.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for all that up and down exercise. It's good. My thighs are definitely pumped down. Let's start with the big one. So I'll start with you, Quentin, and we'll work down the line. Are electric cars really cleaner?
you know, with the battery, the impact of making the battery is huge, vast. The impact of cars, the electricity all comes from burning coal, all those things. You know, as Dan mentioned, Rowan Atkinson and Volvo don't think they are.
So you referenced the now infamous Volvo report, which came out in 2020. And it said that, you know, the carbon debt embedded in an EV takes 70,000 kilometres and around 10 years to pay back. Now, that's been roundly disproved by, you know, several universities, particularly, I can never pronounce his name,
Olka Hoekstra.
Yeah, in Eindhoven University. But, you know, they didn't put in the carbon emissions from, you know, the production of oil, the refining, the distribution for the fuel for the combustion car that was compared in this, or the fact that the batteries were recycled. So that myth has got really, really embedded. And when you talk to anybody, they say, oh, well, the carbon in debt, these cars aren't green. It takes nearly 10 years and 70,000 kilometres. And that's also surfacing now in America and being used in the Senate. So, you know, why is it there for so long, and why is it so intractable? And the brutal truth of the matter is that, you know, electric cars, if you take the whole life carbon emissions, if you take the tailpipe, it's about a year to 12 to 17,000 miles, depending on the grid and depending how it's driven, when that car pays back that embedded carbon debt. And after that, obviously, it's in huge credit because there are no emissions. And the debate about tyres and brakes we'll have in a minute. So the idea that a combustion car could be more green than an electric car is bizarrely embedded in the internet. And how has that happened? Yeah. Because of, you know, misinformation. And the Volvo report was connected to a large car company who PR'd it. So this is why these discussions are so important. Another quick stat is that, you know, if you took, this was produced by the Energy Transition Committee in America, if you take all the CO2 emissions from the entire renewables industry over the next 30 years, and that's electric cars, batteries, wind farms, turbines, solar, all the electric stuff, that over 30 years would amount to 6 months of global emissions from the fossil fuels industry. So the idea that electric cars are not green is just nonsense.
Yes, thank you. Lorna, would you like to add any specific points to that?
Yeah, I'll come in on the people side of it. So with over 1,600 drivers in pure electric vehicles, whilst all of that side is on the inbuilt side of it, and I have to also say I loved the video you voiced over, which talked about the electricity used in diesel refining. Yeah. So, of course, you've got that side of it as well. But everybody forgets that driving these vehicles is a much better experience, that when they're parked outside of schools, they're not churning out the fumes. When they're going through underground car parks, it's much cleaner. When you're working on them in a workshop, you haven't got all the fumes there. So my drivers are coming back because they don't have headaches as much. It's all of those air quality benefits that go with it that we seem to forget is there as well. So it's not just about that. They're grabbing hold of the myths that are there and propelling them forward in terms of building these vehicles. When you get the electric, it's there all the time, and you're no longer putting all this stuff in. And the other myth that comes in with it on that embedded side of it is the grid is dirty. Well, actually, the grid is getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner and cleaner all the time. And just at the beginning quarter of this year, more electricity was generated from wind than any other source. So it is continually getting cleaner. So all of those stats only improve.
And Ewan, I mean, I always turn to you. You're my hero in the not in the total globe, but in the world of batteries, definitely.
I'll take that.
You'll take that. But yes, that understanding of the impact of manufacturing battery, you know, for a person outside the industry, very difficult to know. You hear that story. Oh, making the batteries, massive impact on the planet. I don't know if it is or isn't.
So actually, yeah, if we go back to that study, the debunked study, basically what they've said is we've not tried hard enough to decarbonise our supply chain. Right. So they had assumed, you know, batteries made in the most carbon. I always do this consistently. Every conference, the mic starts too far away. So basically they're saying, you know, we've made the batteries in the most carbon-intensive gigafactory on the most carbon-intensive grid. And likewise, we've done the same with the chassis. So basically, that's the starting point, and it gets so much greener if you power the gigafactory with renewables, if you use clean energy to extract the raw materials. So, for example, look at Cornish Lithium and what they're doing with geothermal waters. They are extracting lithium from geothermal waters. There's no fresh water use or anything like this. It's a closed-loop process. They put the brine or geothermal water back where they found it, having extracted 3 times as much lithium as conventional evaporation pond techniques, and that is geothermally powered by the heat from the geothermal waters. So there's all sorts of incredible techniques we can do to decarbonise that supply chain. But coming back to the study, so they claim that it would take 78,000 kilometres to break even with a petrol Volvo XC40 car. So that's 48,750 miles. Bearing in mind the reliability and the longevity of battery pack and an electric powertrain, that is at most 16% of that electric car's lifespan. So it only takes 16% of its lifespan, but then a worst case scenario, to break even versus a petrol
even
car.
using their figures, that's still the case.
And that's ignoring the fact that the petrol or diesel car would have clapped out by 300,000 miles, and the electric vehicle would either still be going strong, or if the chassis had rusted through, the battery would be getting reused to power a classic car or to provide grid storage. Yeah. So that goes on. They've not factored in that at all, right. And they've done a worst case scenario, and it's still so much rosier than the way it's being reported.
Yeah. I think one of the really critical ones, and it is such an appalling story. It's very easy to kind of just bury your head in the sand because it's so awful. But the situation of mining in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, that's constantly used. What about your cobalt? It's child slavery. I mean, I would have had, say, 4 million tweets that told me that. I don't want to exaggerate at all, but that's certainly a thing. And then I didn't know, and this is the shame, Quentin. You'll understand this. I spent 2 days in an oil refinery before I did Fully Charged show. A series called "How Do They Do It? How do you refine oil?" It was fascinating. I would have been told, "Oh, this is the cobalt we use to remove sulfur from diesel and petrol." And it didn't stay in, so I'd forgotten that. And then I suddenly went, oh, hang on, I read somewhere we use large amounts of cobalt to remove sulfur. And it always has done, we always will do. And now there are batteries with zero cobalt. But it is a thing we have to face. I think as the human race, it's nothing to do with electric vehicles, that if there's that kind of exploitation going on in extracting materials, it's just wrong, because that's got more cobalt in. And we're all guilty.
People don't talk about the Fair Cobalt Alliance, which all the major manufacturers in fact have signed up to, which puts the children in schools rather than mines. But, we have to face the fact that a lot of these unregulated Chinese mines, there are human rights abuses, absolutely. But the amount of cobalt being used in batteries is now down, 90% from what it was in 2010, 2011. And as you say, with LFP batteries and different battery chemistries, we're going to be using less of these critical minerals. That doesn't mean to say we should ignore the problems in the DRC, but it's a question of balance. Not every electric car has a large quantity of cobalt and can be traced back to those poor kids in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the battery chemistries will start to reduce this, won't it?
Oh yeah, as you've already mentioned, we have vastly slashed the amount of cobalt in cobalt-containing batteries. There are cobalt-free versions of those chemistries expected to come online pretty soon, and obviously lithium iron phosphate, which you mentioned, which contains no nickel or cobalt, is incredibly ethical in comparison, long-lived, safer, etc. It's got all of these amazing advantages, and that's been used in some of the best-selling electric cars in the world right now, with other manufacturers switching over. To give you an idea of how rapidly cobalt is phasing out, so cobalt is typically co-located with nickel and copper in the same ore. So it's not like you're taking a tiny bit of the rock and then throwing the rest away. It's a byproduct of copper mining, effectively, in DRC. And in Indonesia, it's a byproduct of nickel mining. So there is a forecasted shortfall of nickel by 2030 because we're moving towards high nickel batteries for the maximum range that you can squeeze into a car. But there is a forecasted cobalt surplus because those chemistries will have so little cobalt in them, and most other cars are going to be moving to LFP and so on. So yeah, it's not as much of an issue. What is an issue is the artisanal mining, making sure that where that is conducted, that is safe that there are fair wages, and obviously that there's no child labour involved. There are some incredible people who study and engage with artisanal mining, particularly because if you look at DRC, it's easy for us in our kind of Western ivory towers to say, oh, you shouldn't be doing that, that's a terrible thing. But when you are in a nation that does not have a welfare state, does not have free healthcare, free education.
And you have to kind of eat.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, the average wage is like $2 a day, and here's an industry that's giving you $3 a day. Of course you're going to do that. Obviously make sure kids are not involved in this and make sure that it's as safe as possible. This is part of what the likes of the Fair Cobalt Alliance is doing, as well as just obviously trying to make sure that we can have as little artisanal mining and as much of a, I suppose, a welfare state as possible, give everyone an equal chance in life, I suppose.
But I think the thing I always want to really underline is that you go to an area of the world and you extract oil and you ship that oil to a developed country and you refine it and you burn it once in your vehicle. You can't burn it again. And I think this is the really important thing. One of the recent episodes we did with Apple computers was their iPhone recycling. They have stated, and we're going to be sure to check this, it's true, by 2025, they will use zero freshly mined cobalt in any of their products, not just their phones, in anything. They're recycling everything. So we watched them, a machine that recycles iPhones, and they're extracting the cobalt from the batteries in all those phones, and they're going to use it again, and that's all they're going to use. And I think that is such a critically important change in the way that we perceive the world. We've grown up with stuff that you take it, you burn it, and you go, it's gone. Yeah. And it hasn't gone. It's still floating around us and it's having a bit of an impact. And the fact that we now live in a world where we could reuse those materials, I don't know how many times. I mean, can you use cobalt 1,000 times in like over 200 years? I have no idea.
Definitely give it a go.
Yeah.
It's one of the easiest and most financially viable materials to recover from lithium-ion batteries.
Right.
So the initial recycling techniques didn't recover the lithium; they recovered the cobalt and the copper. Right. That was what was expensive. That was what was worth money.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you've got recycling techniques that can successfully and financially viably recover up to 100% of the materials, including with lithium iron phosphate, which, if you think about it, is just made of lithium and rust. So like, there's techniques being developed here in the UK that have 100 times the throughput, a fraction of the energy costs, no nasty chemicals or anything. And we are very much at the beginning of this recycling journey, but we've already got incredibly sustainable processes in place.
I'll say that's one of the other myths, isn't it, that's out there at the moment, which is you cannot recycle batteries. Yeah. Well, actually you can, and even though the technology keeps changing in what you can get out of them, there are stages to go beforehand. So in Amsterdam last week, I was fortunate to be at the Ajax Stadium. Great, brilliant place to go to. And they'd got all the battery walls, so they'd got 3 megawatts of battery capacity from Nissan Leaf batteries.
Yeah, amazing.
And they're using it to power the whole of that game. I think his biggest concern was actually keeping the beer cold whilst the game was going as well. And which one did he prioritise? Was it the game or the beer? But that's what they're doing. So actually they've built a business case for a second load of batteries.
Yeah.
We also here today have Peter Coleman from EcoBat in the West Midlands. And he, Peter, I mean, you recycle EV batteries, don't you? How much is recyclable? Just
well, we have a continuous stream, essentially, so we can bring in, analyse, work to repair, repurpose or reuse, and then only then recycle these batteries. But we work to make sure that all elements of that, whether it's the casing, connectors, and the cells and modules, can all find either a new life or be responsibly recycled.
And the idea that batteries will be this steaming conical pile in landfill. Tell us how unrealistic that is.
That's very unrealistic.
People will not be taking batteries to landfill anytime soon, will they?
Not on our watch.
And why is that, Peter? Just quickly tell us. Might it have something to do with their values?
Absolutely. There's legislative, there's commercial imperatives, and there's CSR and ESG imperatives to do the right thing with batteries, and we're there to help OEMs in that process.
So there's another one busted. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you. Lorna, in your how many electric vehicles are you running in your fleet?
How many electric vehicles? So we've got 1,300 electric cars. That doesn't include the salary sacrifice ones. So there's another couple of hundred of those. And then I've got 312, give or take, depending on how many more I've put on, fans.
So presumably then every night or every other day you've got a massive battery fire burning down the company.
That's it, and I've destroyed the car park at work as well.
I mean, it must be phenomenal, yeah. No, because that's the next one. I had that the other day. A guy walked past me at Tesco's when I plugged the MG4 into the charger when I was doing my shopping, and he went, "That'll catch fire in a minute." Hey! It's quite jolly about it.
I mean, I love that stuff as well, because when was the last time that a lighter or you had a cigarette and it was next to an electric vehicle that caused it to fire? And yet you walk into a fuel station and there's all these flammable signs on saying, do not do this.
I mean, what is it? 19 times less likely to catch fire, an EV, than an ICE car.
Yeah.
And let's just put this into context. We have Chris Chandler here from Lex Auto Lease, who has quite a few EVs on his fleet. Is it 160,000? Just down here, Dan. Just tell us how many electric plug-in cars you've got on your fleet at Lex Auto Lease.
Oh, yeah. So, Lex Auto Lease is our corporate arm. And so at the moment, our deliveries are running about 70% of deliveries this year are electric, plug-in hybrid or pure electric. Within Lloyd's Transport, which includes our retail arm, which is Black Horse, we've currently got in excess of 165,000.
165,000, Chris. So how many of those have caught fire?
None that I know of, unless they've all gone pop this morning, but I really, really doubt that.
Okay, that's quite a big sample size, isn't it,
Yeah.
Chris?
To my knowledge, we've had no fires and we've had no battery drivetrain failures. And what I mean by that is EVs do have a 12-volt auxiliary battery as well.
Yeah.
And they may need replacing exactly the same as your 12-volt in your petrol or diesel car. But the drivetrain batteries, we haven't had failures.
So look, thank you very much, Chris. That's great. 165,000 isn't enough for you. We also have Tusker Direct up here, who have 23,000 EVs on lease.
Yeah, we have 32,000 vehicles in total. 23,000 of those are BEVs, and then we have 3,000 ULEVs, and the rest are diesel. So a good starting base to think about what's the difference between BEVs and ICE. For example, if you look at running out of battery or running out of juice, for the BEVs, we've had 32 out of those 23,000 run out of juice. 5 times that for petrol and diesel have run out. And that's a smaller base. So that's 0.2% for electric versus 2.6% for petrol and diesel. On top of that, the biggest problem we have with petrol and diesel is not running out of juice, it's misfueling, which obviously you'd struggle to do with an electric. And then the other thing, the other myth that we like to bust is, we run a 32,000 fleet. Service, maintenance, repair, running the vehicle is obviously a big part of our cost. And running a BEV is 31% cheaper than running a petrol or diesel car.
So you heard it here first, 31% cheaper in terms of maintenance. And just quickly, Paul, how many fires?
We haven't had any fires yet. Actually, I think we had one of the petrol about 5 years ago.
All right. Let's move on, because we've got a lot to get through. Particulates in the air, tyres. If you drive an electric car, it actually produces more particulates because of the tyres and the brakes than if you drive a diesel in reverse through a kindergarten playground. That's what I was told many times. But I mean, when I heard that, you go, well, tyres do wear down. So when they wear down, that stuff has to go somewhere. Some stuff exists that's no longer on your tyre.
I'm on my original set of tyres on my electric car, 35,000 miles, and they're still okay,
Yeah.
And you...
36,000 miles, still on my first set, haven't changed any yet.
And Chris at Lex Auto Lease, are you seeing a massive degradation in tyres and advanced tyre wear?
No.
No, he shakes his head.
He'll say no.
Paul, are you replacing tyres every other week?
Obviously, we replace tyres, diesel, petrol and electric, and it's exactly the same cost overall to run the tyre maintenance budget for a diesel.
So 180,000 EVs that aren't wearing out their tyres prematurely.
Faster, yeah.
Ewan, you did a study with the RAC.
Yeah, so this was in response to an article or a press release that had claimed that EVs would be, harder wearing on their tyres, you'd have to replace them more often because they're heavier and bulkier and so on. And that is certifiable nonsense. You speak to any fleet owner with a vast fleet of electric vehicles, and they find that the tyre degradation is broadly the same. Sometimes it's even smoother on the car. That said, because electric vehicles are so torquey, and if it's still a bit of a novelty to you, you're driving it like you stole it, then you'll go through your tyres quicker. That is where, no, genuinely, that's what causes higher wear. But when you're driving it like normal, you will absolutely get the same rate of wear. And on top of that, there's your brake emissions that was claimed in this article that the brakes would cause an issue too. So, or it's just kind of claimed in general by naysayers that the brakes will cause an issue. Because we've got regenerative braking in electric vehicles, that's doing most of the heavy lifting. So instead of about 40,000 miles, which is your typical lifespan for brake pads, you're looking at 100,000+ miles. And in fact, some electric vehicles need to get their brake discs or pads changed sooner than that because they've been used too little and they've started to rust up. Yeah. So remember, if you have an EV, once every couple of weeks, give it a good stamp on the brakes. Make sure there's no one behind you, and that will keep it in.
So the idea that brake pads are wearing prematurely and creating all this dust, we see Tesla taxis, don't we, with the same pads and discs at 200,000 miles.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it pales in. I was going to use my own car as an example, but that obviously pales into comparison because I was going to say a mere 125,000 miles on the same set from you.
So I pose the question again, where did these myths come from, and why aren't journalists checking with people like Tusker and Lex, who have these huge fleets and can provide this empirical data? And this is what has to change here. So, sorry, Robert.
No,
I was going to say, I love the bit on the weight issue as well, because, the Mini is out there, and we've all stood by it. You see the size of that Mini versus the size of all the modern vehicles next to it. So vehicles, by definition, in cars have got bigger and heavier. But when it comes to commercial vehicles, a 3.5-ton van is still 3.5 tons, no matter what the fuel type is that you put in it. A 40-ton truck is still a 40-ton truck. They are not heavier. They are not going to get through their tyres quicker because of their weight.
Very good point. And I'll move on because I was going to say something else, but I won't. Can the grid cope?
Yes.
This is the one I love. Yeah,
Yes.
Lorna.
So I was just going to say, because every time I've asked that of anyone at the National Grid, it's the short. When you're doing an interview, you want an answer, and they just go, yes. You sit there going, oh, shit, I've got to have another question now.
So tell us why. Tell us why it can cope.
So the biggest thing that everyone forgets with all of this, it's a transition. This is not a cliff edge. For anybody who says the grid can't cope, they are expecting us never to build anything ever again, because it can cope right now with everything that we've got right now. And in fact, since 2012, the invention of the LED light bulb was the best thing that happened, because the whole consumption went that way significantly. So we've still got all of that to catch up with first. And the things that we're doing, we are moving at a pace and trying to build things. So, for example, we're putting 5 times more onshore wind in the next 7 years than we've done in the last 30 years. We are continuing to build and connect and everything else. And prediction on the connection requests that are coming through at the moment is from 165 a day to 2,000. This is where we are seeing a massive shift with everybody looking at how the grid works. And don't forget, since electricity's been in, it's only ever gone one way. We've built everything to be one way. Now we're looking at how we bring the electricity back in from all of you brilliant people out there that are actually looking at these batteries as storage components. And how do we get that in? So, going back to your original question, can the grid cope? Yes.
I think that's answered it very well. Charging on the road. So this is the most recent one, because I think that what fascinates me in a way, that, and I want some clever academics to do a study of the psychology, nothing to do with the technology, the psychology of the technological change, because that's what fascinates me. It's the reason. So very early on, when I first did talks about electric cars, it was they're silent. They're going to run over me. I'm not going to know that this psychotic murderer in a Tesla is going to run me down deliberately, because he'd have to, or she. I'm not going to be specific to male drivers, murderers, but that is like. And I did say, well, there is a driver in it. Do they not care? They just want to run you down with their silent cars. And now, if no one mentions that now, no one ever says that. But now it's the charging infrastructure isn't ready. Always said by people who've never driven an electric car and never used the charging infrastructure.
And just give us a background on this story here that appeared in the Times and got 7,000 comments in the Times, the most of any column that the Times has ever published. And I spoke to Giles about this, and it turns out he was plugging his iPace in with its 100 kilowatt battery into the domestic socket in his living room and using an extension cord. There was no charging box. So no wonder it took him 19 hours to charge it up. And then he would go down and do the same thing in hotels and things. So this is why the experience was universally miserable, and the fact that it was pretty unreliable. But suffice it to say that he can't be that dissatisfied with his electric car adventure, because he's now driving a BMW i3. So, and he said to me, look, Quentin, the reason why we do these stories in the Times about electric cars is they get so much attention, so many comments and so many clicks. And that perhaps gets us nearer to the reason why we have this backdrop of anti-EV hysteria, is that it's newspapers in a time of falling advertising getting clicks. So, so the backstory to this is quite interesting.
Mm. But I mean, but the public charging infrastructure, I mean, I always say this, when I first had an electric car, which you and I both, it's really where we met about electric cars. We both had an iMEV. A Mitsubishi iMEV, and people say, well, I have been asked, what was the charging infrastructure like then? I said, there wasn't literally none.
I would knock on people's doors and say, I am an electric car owner, can I use your plug?
Can I plug into your car? There was a rapid charger at Mitsubishi's headquarters in Cirencester, so you had to ring them first, get permission, they'd let you through the gate, you'd plug it in, a rapid charger with Chademo. You might not remember that. Chademo, and you plug it in, and it was all in Japanese, because it was a Japanese machine, and no one at Mitsubishi knew how to use it. And you'd press the start button, and nothing happened. And I'd be stuck there for hours. So that was charging infrastructure. I think it's improved since then. But yeah, I mean, do you think in your experience with your drivers in particular, Laura, I mean,
it's massively improved. And I love the other story that came out. Somebody says they tried to drive from John O'Groats to Land's End in their Porsche Taycan. And what you could do is, we've done that in vans. There's a bunch of people in the audience here as well that were with me in rallies. We've done the same trip in vans. We've done 5 cities in 5 days in vans and 2 electric trucks.
Right.
The infrastructure is improving all the time. And what most of us found, like yourself, I actually need to stop for the toilet now before I need to stop for the vehicle to charge. So with battery technology improving, with the ability to get out there and charge improving, actually there's no excuse anymore. No.
I think also what we don't hear is that the vast majority of people charge at home. 80% of all EV owners charge at home at night, and actually rarely use the public charging network. So just tell me, who uses the public charging network every week here? Okay, a few.
Every week? No, I don't do it every week.
How many people always charge at night at home?
Yeah.
You see, that it's a significant majority of people, and that is never represented. This idea that we've got to have these 300,000 chargers, which I think is a figure that Boris just plucked out the air, is becoming a real challenge, and people insist that they need to have a charger at the bottom of their road, like a petrol station. So I think we need to look at this, but the fact remains is that we need a better infrastructure. The government's got to start pulling its finger out, particularly with the strategic motorway network, where it takes 4 years for a connection.
It's a challenge, and the government will always talk, and DFT will always talk about the rapid charging fund, and we know that's there. So that was actually designed to cover those black spots, basically, where there's never been any grid connection because there was never a need for it. So we need the government to get behind that and push that and allow that to come out so that we can actually fix this.
Yeah. We have mentioned size before, but I remember when the story came out fairly recently about heavy electric cars or something, I just looked up and there was actually a list. The top 10 heaviest cars on the road, commercially available new cars on the road in the UK, and the top 10 are all petrol and diesel, and number 11 is the Tesla Model X, which I always think of as the most absurdly ridiculous heavy big car. But I wish that we sold the Ford F-150 Lightning in this country, because that would definitely be number 1. I walked around one of those the other day in Vancouver, and it took me half an hour. It's massive. It's a ridiculous machine. But yeah, I mean, they are heavier, but you know, are they going to break down garages, car parks and bridges and all that stuff?
I mean, they're not necessarily heavier. EVs, if you look at the likes of the Tesla Model 3 at about 1.8 tonnes, that's broadly the same weight as most of its German internal combustion counterparts. So they have kind of reached that parity now. And of course, as cell chemistry continues to increase in energy density, how much you can squeeze in per weight or volume, then we're going to see that continue to come down. Particularly because, if you can squeeze more range into a smaller space, you can be more clever with your vehicle design. So definitely watch this space. EVs will get lighter. I'm genuinely not too concerned about that. The pieces about concrete car parks, just completely collapsing under the weight of EVs, that all comes from people who drive 2.7-ton petrol Range Rovers, not 1.8-ton Model 3s or 2.5-ton Model Xs.
My first Nissan Leaf, beautiful in the summer, really, it was, all those jokes about I had to wear extra coats and things in the winter because you didn't want to put your heater on. I feel that's gone now. I don't notice a difference to anything like the same degree in cold and heat.
Well, yeah, I mean, the range of electric cars has increased, but the power draw of the central heating system, if anything, has decreased a bit because of heat pumps. So, yeah, you can run an EV, as we'll cover in a minute, for a heck of a long time before it depletes its battery, by running the heating if you're stuck in a traffic jam. Yeah. So yeah, again, that's not really an issue at all. And also, with the Leaf, it didn't have any thermal management. So if it was cold outside, the car was out there for long enough, the battery would be cold. What we're seeing now is quite a lot of manufacturers being quite clever about the thermal management of the battery, not just cooling it down when it's too hot, but heating it up to its optimum temperature when it's too cold. And that equally applies to, particularly to Tesla, with the way that they precondition the battery, in other words, heat it up.
And the heat pumps as well.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. So as we will see in a minute, that range reduction in cold weather is not actually as scary as you might think. And that's including with new chemistries like lithium iron phosphate, which actually don't like winter very much. They do get a bit chilly, but if you thermally manage them right, as Tesla do, you can be really smart about the amount of that range that you preserve, and that's still going to be way more than 2010, 2011 Nissan Leaf. It's still in the hundreds.
You look at it, it's an average of about 20% loss of battery efficiency in cold weather. But then if you, as I did yesterday, I went to the American Department of Energy website and said, how much energy loss in a gas car with below freezing, and it comes out at 15%.
Yeah.
So this heinous crime that electric cars commit in cold weather is pretty similar to petrol cars. But that question is never asked. No. Is what's the efficiency of a petrol car in cold weather?
No. I was just saying, just to add to that, what Ewan said about the battery management side of it, don't forget, all of these stories came out for all the early electric vehicles that didn't have the range. And we've now got all these vehicles with an extra 100, 200 miles on them that you can do, where a 20% on that still means you can get around.
Yeah. And this fabulous story about the man on the I-95.
Yeah, that's great, that story.
Warming his hands on the vents from his electric car and watching YouTube on the screen. What do we know?
Yeah. Let's go. The cost. I think this one is, for me, the most legitimate concern. I totally understand this. I didn't buy new cars until I was a pretty old man because I didn't know people who bought new cars. I bought 10th hand VW Golfs with the wing hanging off. That was get a bit of tape, stick it back on. It is still true that they are more expensive than a brand new petrol or diesel car.
But they are coming down and have come down steadily since the days when those Mitsubishis, I think, were 27 grand.
Is that what they were?
Yeah, it was such a miserable little punishment wagon that would do 50 miles.
27 grand, because I just want to say, the second time I wound the window down, the handle came off. And that was a 27 grand car.
Yeah, and I was pleased when the Citroen C0 that I replaced, sorry, we're going down memory lane now, the Citroen C0 replaced it was 25 grand. So, they have come down significantly, but they're still too expensive, yes, and there's on average a 10 grand difference. But then, people need to understand that why do you have to think about these large capital sums when the total cost of ownership in a EV is significantly less now than a combustion car? And this figure from Tusky here of 31% less in maintenance costs across your life cycle of a car, that adds up to a lot of money plus the fuel. So in total ownership, they are cheaper, but this figure is getting in the way. The next question is, Chinese cars will come and they will be cheaper. But what do we do about those? They will be better for consumers. Will they be better for our economy?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really big challenge that we're definitely seeing. I don't know if some of you will have seen, but some of the cars that Elliot Richards, who lives in Shanghai, who films for us, if you could buy them in China, they're like £10,000 or less, £8,000 for a perfectly decent little four-seater, hatchback car. And they're going to be £25,000 when they come here. So someone's going ka-ching somewhere in that market. That really does relate to the next question, which is about the 2030 ban on the sale of new combustion engine vehicles, not the ban on the ones that exist. New ones, but I mean, is that too soon?
No.
Could we? Oh, thank you.
So look, fair charge. We do a lot of political lobbying, and when Kimi Badenoch, was strutting around in the summer in prime ministerial ambition mode, she was saying, look, this needs to be pushed back, and there's a huge, I think the word here is coven of right-wing backbench MPs who want to destabilise this whole energy transition. So I saw the headlines and I spoke to Grant Shapps, and Ben Kilby, my partner, went into number 10 and we said, look, this is all about UK GDP, UK PLC and creating industrial policy that investment, global capital can come to the UK in the confidence that this won't be pulled out from underneath their feet. And I think we did make a difference because government has said, look, 2030 is fixed.
Yeah.
And we've got somebody from a Department of Business and Trade in the audience, and I had a conversation with him, and I said, how important is electrification to the UK economy? And he said it's hugely, hugely important. In fact, Jeremy Hunt described it as a £1 trillion opportunity. So that's why when you get policy certainty of 2030, you get people like Tata saying, we will invest in a battery factory, £4 billion. We will have BMW making minis in Coventry. We will have Stellantis making electric vans in Ellesmere Port. And we will have investment into this country. So that's what's at stake here. When you hear we need 2030 to be pulled and 2035 or even 2040, that would completely screw our motor industry because they have 7-year product cycles, which they've planned and which they've invested in, and to take away that policy certainty would be an act of the most grievous self-sabotage.
Yeah.
Precisely. I mean, Mini Cowley would have been obsolete if they continue to produce internal combustion engines. So the fact that the UK government has stepped in and given them enough confidence to switch the entire production line to electric is very good news, because that means that they are going to be industrially relevant, not just within the UK, but of course for the vehicles that they export. So very good news indeed. But what we do need to see from the UK government is a clear set of incentives and a clear set of regulations, a bit like the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, saying if you want to do this in this country at this scale, this is the tax breaks or the incentives that you would get. And it's clearly defined, and that's everyone who does that gets that. And then the European Union model, which is, if you want to sell any vehicles in this block, then you need to have at least this much recycled content within the battery, and that's going to be a sliding scale upwards as the amount of dead batteries eventually starts to come online. But the problem with batteries at the moment in electric vehicles is that they're lasting too long, so we don't have enough to recycle. But they will eventually die many, many years down the line, and that's where the EU said, we want to build up the recycling capacity. Right. Geopolitical security, we have those raw materials ready to recycle back into new batteries. Circular economy helps to bring costs and carbon down. So basically, if we are able to emulate both the Inflation Reduction Act and the EU legislation about, rules of origin and recycled content, we will have an incredibly strong industry, which, watch as private investment would start flowing into the UK again.
And while Russia has issues with sanctions with their nickel and cobalt, and China is being distracted by their declining property market, we have a huge opportunity in this country to take advantage. And we won't win the race, but at least we can get back in it, because at the moment we're not in it, and that's the tragedy.
Thank you.
If you have been, thank you for watching. To support Stop Burning Stuff, please visit our Patreon page. Your contribution can make a genuine difference. Share this video with colleagues, friends and family. Watch the Fully Charged show and visit our Everything Electric exhibitions around the world.